The Galactic Council chamber buzzed with nervous energy as Ambassador Zethkar of the Valerian Empire stood before the massive holographic display. The planet rotating slowly in the blue light looked deceptively peaceful from space, swirling white clouds, vast blue oceans, and green landmasses that seemed almost inviting. But every being in that chamber knew better. Kepler 438b, Zethkar announced, his forearms gesturing dramatically toward the projection. Classification, Class 15 Deathworld. Gravity 3 times standard. Atmospheric storms that can level mountains. Predators that hunt in packs and can tear through starship hull plating. Temperature swings that would freeze or boil most species within hours. The assembled delegates from across the galaxy shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The insectoid thrax clicked their mandibles anxiously. The crystalline quartz sang nervous harmonies that made the air shimmer. Even the usually confident draconian representatives seemed subdued. For 3,000 years, Zethkar continued, we have lost expedition after expedition to this cursed world. Our best warriors, our most advanced technology, our brightest scientists all consumed by Kepler 438b. It has become the graveyard of our greatest ambitions. In the back of the chamber, Ambassador Sarah Chen of the Terran Federation sat quietly, taking notes on her tablet. At 45, she had seen enough galactic politics to know when something was building toward her people. The humans had only been members of the Galactic Council for 50 years, practically yesterday in galactic terms, and they were still viewed with a mixture of curiosity and condescension by the older species. However, Zethkar's voice took on a sly tone that made Sarah look up sharply. We have recently been graced with a new member species. The humans of Terra have been quite vocal about their capabilities. Perhaps it is time to test these claims. The chamber erupted in a cacophony of sounds, chittering, roaring, electronic bleeps, and crystalline chimes. Sarah stood slowly, her heart racing but her face calm. She had been in the diplomatic corps for 20 years and knew a setup when she saw one. Ambassador Zethkar, she said, her voice cutting through the noise, are you formally proposing that humanity attempt a mission to Kepler 438b? The Valerian's segmented eyes gleamed with what Sarah had learned to recognize as malicious amusement. Indeed, Ambassador Chen. The Council has agreed that if humanity can establish a permanent presence on Kepler 438b for 1 standard year, you will be granted full voting rights in all Council matters, access to the highest levels of galactic technology, and a permanent seat on the High Command. Sarah felt her breath catch. Those were incredible terms, the kind of deal that could advance human civilization by centuries. But the trap was obvious too. No species had survived more than a few weeks on that world. The Council was offering humanity everything they wanted in exchange for what they believed was impossible. And if we fail? Sarah asked. Then, humanity will accept observer status for the next millennium, Zethkar replied smoothly. No voting, no advanced technology sharing, no colonial rights to any world above Class 5. The chamber fell silent. Sarah could feel thousands of alien eyes watching her, waiting for her response. Some showed pity, they genuinely liked humans and thought this was cruel. Others showed anticipation, they wanted to see the upstart species put in their place. Sarah activated her quantum communicator, sending an encrypted message back to Earth. The response came within minutes, routed through the fastest channels available. President Martinez's response was brief, Council authorization granted. Show them what humans can do. Sarah stood and faced the assembly. The Terran Federation accepts your challenge, Ambassador Zethkar. We will establish our presence on Kepler 438b within 6 months. The chamber erupted again, this time with surprise. Most species had taken years to prepare for their failed attempts. Zethkar's forearms spread wide in what Sarah knew was either surprise or contempt. Very well, he said. The Council will monitor your progress with great interest. 3 weeks later, Sarah found herself aboard the battleship UES Indomitable, humanity's most advanced starship, as it dropped out of hyperspace near Kepler 438b. The planet filled the main view screen, and even the hardened crew fell silent at the sight. From space, you could see the massive storm systems churning across the surface, hurricanes that dwarfed anything on Earth, stretching across entire continents. Lightning flickered constantly between the clouds, sometimes visible even through the thick atmosphere. The night side of the planet glowed with volcanic activity and strange bioluminescent phenomena. "Jesus," whispered Commander Jake Morrison, the mission leader. A former Marine who had served in the Belt Wars, Morrison had volunteered for this mission despite knowing it was likely a death sentence. No wonder they call it a death world. "Sensors are picking up massive electromagnetic interference," reported Lieutenant Yuki Tanaka from her station. "Whatever's causing those storms is playing hell with our instruments." Dr. Elena Rodriguez, the mission's lead xenobiologist, was studying her readings with fascination rather than fear. The biodiversity readings are off the charts. If even half of this data is accurate, the evolution on this world has been incredibly aggressive. Captain Susan Walsh, the Indomitable's commanding officer, studied the tactical displays with a frown. Preliminary scans show the previous expedition sites. The Valerian forward base, she pointed to a crater where instruments detected only fused metal and glass, looks like it was hit by a nuclear weapon. The Thrax biodome is completely overrun with some kind of aggressive plant life. The Draconian fortress. She paused. There's nothing left but a hole in the ground. Morrison nodded grimly. What about suitable sites for our base? There, Dr. Rodriguez pointed to a landmass on the main continent. The sensors show a plateau about 2,000 meters above sea level. Rocky terrain, some shelter from the worst storms, and far enough from the major predator zones identified in the previous missions data. Previous missions lasted 3 weeks maximum, Morrison said. We need to do this differently. Sarah had been quietly reviewing the classified files that Earth's intelligence services had managed to acquire about the previous missions. They all made the same mistake, she said finally. They tried to impose their will on the planet. Force field domes, massive fortifications, direct confrontation with the ecosystem. They fought the planet instead of adapting to it. What are you suggesting? Captain Walsh asked. We don't fight Kepler 438b, Sarah said. We become part of it. The planning session that followed lasted 18 hours. The human team reviewed every piece of available data about the planet, from atmospheric composition to gravitational effects to the behavior patterns of the massive predators that had torn apart previous expeditions. The gravity is going to be our biggest immediate challenge, Dr. Rodriguez explained. 3 times Earth normal means our bones and muscles will be under constant stress. The previous missions used anti-grav technology to compensate, but that made them targets. Every piece of high-energy technology on this world attracts the local fauna like a beacon. Morrison was studying the predator data. These stalkers that took out the Draconian team, they hunt in packs, they're intelligent enough to use tools, and they seem to coordinate attacks across kilometers. But look at this. He highlighted a section of the report. They avoid certain areas entirely. Areas with these plague trees that emit some kind of toxic spore cloud. Natural defenses, Sarah realized. The ecosystem has its own balance. If we can figure out how to use it instead of fighting it. Lieutenant Tanaka had been running atmospheric simulations. The storm patterns are predictable if you know what to look for. The previous teams treated them as random disasters, but there's actually a complex pattern. If we time our operations right, we could use the storms as cover instead of shelter. Dr. Rodriguez was practically vibrating with excitement. This is incredible. Every threat these reports mention has an ecological purpose. The acid rain that dissolved the Thrax biodome, it only happens in certain seasons, and it's part of a mineral cycle that feeds the forest growth. The electromagnetic pulses that fried the Valerian equipment, they're generated by these massive bioelectric organisms, but they're also how the ecosystem maintains its electrical balance. Morrison began to see the shape of their strategy. We go low-tech. No force fields, no energy weapons, no anti-grav systems. We live like the planet expects us to live. The other species couldn't do it, Captain Walsh pointed out. The Valerians need their environmental suits to survive in anything but their home atmosphere. The Thrax collapse without their bio-support systems. The Draconians require specific mineral supplements or they go into hibernation. Sarah smiled for the first time since accepting the challenge.
But humans are different. We're adaptation specialists. Our ancestors survived ice ages and deserts, Arctic tundra and tropical rainforests. We've already proven we can live almost anywhere.
This isn't anywhere, Captain Walsh warned. This is specifically designed to kill us. No, Dr. Rodriguez said, understanding dawning in her voice.
It's designed to kill everything that doesn't belong. The question is, can we learn to belong?
The landing craft descended through Kepler 438b's atmosphere 3 days later. Sarah felt her stomach lurch as the increased gravity took effect, but she forced herself to remain calm.
The 12-person advance team was humanity's best: scientists, soldiers, survival experts, engineers, and medical personnel. Each had volunteered knowing the odds. The craft shook violently as they passed through a storm layer, lightning arcing around the hull.
The pilot, a former test pilot named Carlos Vega, fought the controls with expert skill.
"Weather's getting frisky," he called back.
"But we're still on course for the landing site."
Through the viewports, Sarah caught her first direct glimpse of the planet's surface.
Dense forests stretched to the horizon, broken by strange rock formations that seemed to twist and spiral into impossible shapes. Rivers glowed with bioluminescent algae, creating ribbons of light through the green darkness. And everything was moving. The trees swayed without any visible wind, massive shapes shifted in the shadows between the forests, and the very ground seemed to pulse with life.
"Contact in 30 seconds, Vega announced. "Remember, we go quiet the moment we touch down. No transmissions except emergencies until we establish the communication protocol." The craft touched down in a clearing on the plateau Dr. Rodriguez had identified.
The moment the engines powered down, the planet's sounds rushed in to fill the silence.
Howls and roars echoed from the forest below.
Something that sounded like whale song but pitched low enough to feel in their bones resonated from underground. The air itself seemed to whisper and hiss. Morrison checked his equipment one final time. No energy weapons, no advanced electronics, just basic tools and supplies designed to work without power.
"Everyone remember the rules," he said. "We're not conquerors. We're not explorers.
We're refugees looking for a place to belong.
Act like it."
The airlock cycled, and Sarah Chen stepped onto the surface of Kepler 438b. The air was thick and humid, tasting of ozone and something sweetly organic that made her think of decomposing flowers. The gravity hit her immediately. Her pack felt 3 times heavier, her legs trembled with the effort of standing upright, and her heart worked overtime to pump blood through her body. But she was still standing. Around her, the advance team spread out in a defensive formation that wasn't really defensive at all. They moved slowly, deliberately, making no sudden movements and keeping their primitive weapons lowered. Dr. Rodriguez was already scanning the nearby vegetation with hand-powered instruments, while Morrison studied the terrain with the eye of someone who had survived combat on a dozen worlds. "First shelter priority," Morrison said quietly.
"We need to get underground before nightfall.
The reports are clear that surface activity drops dramatically after dark, but that's when the real predators come out." Dr. Rodriguez had found something interesting. "These rock formations aren't natural," she said, running her hands over the twisted stone.
"They're grown. Some kind of coral-like organism, but adapted for terrestrial use. And, look." She pointed to indentations in the surface. "Tool marks.
Something intelligent shaped these."
Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the planet's humidity. The previous reports didn't mention any intelligent species. "Maybe they never saw them," Morrison said grimly.
"Or maybe they never lived long enough to report them." As the human team began setting up their initial shelter, using hand tools and techniques that would have been familiar to their ancestors, they were being watched. From the forest below, from caves in the rock formations, from burrows in the ground, hundreds of eyes observed these new arrivals. The Watchers had seen many groups come to their world over the centuries. They had learned to recognize the signs, the bright lights, the loud noises, the attempts to reshape the land to match alien needs. Those groups never lasted long. The world would test them, and they would fail, and their remains would eventually feed the ever-hungry ecosystem. But these new arrivals were different. They moved quietly, respectfully.
They studied the land instead of trying to change it. They showed proper fear without showing hostility.
The Watchers decided to wait and see what these strange bipeds would do next. For the first time in centuries, there was a possibility that the new arrivals might actually survive their first night. As the sun set on Kepler 438b, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold that no human eyes had ever seen, Sarachin looked up at the alien stars and whispered a prayer that her species would prove worthy of this terrible, beautiful world. In the distance, something howled, a sound like music and menace combined. The real test was about to begin.
Sarah woke to the sound of something large breathing just outside their shelter.
The underground cave they had carved into the plateau offered protection, but the entrance was covered only by woven branches and local vegetation. Through the gaps, she could see a massive shadow moving in the pre-dawn light. It had been 6 weeks since the landing, and the team had learned to recognize the different rhythms of Kepler 438b's ecosystem. This breathing pattern belonged to what Dr. Rodriguez had dubbed a gentle giant, a herbivorous creature the size of a small building that seemed curious about their settlement but had never shown aggression. Morrison was already awake, lying still in his bedroll with his hand resting on a spear carved from local ironwood. The weapons they carried now bore no resemblance to the high-tech equipment they had brought from Earth. Those had been abandoned after the first week, when it became clear that anything electronic attracted unwanted attention from the planet's numerous bioelectric predators. The breathing moved away, followed by the sound of massive footsteps receding into the forest. Sarah carefully rose and made her way to the cave entrance, her body moving with the practiced efficiency of someone who had adapted to triple gravity. Her legs were stronger now, her balance better, but every movement still required conscious effort. Outside, the plateau was covered in morning mist that glowed with bioluminescent spores. It was beautiful in a way that would have been terrifying 6 weeks ago. Now, Sarah knew that the spores were actually beneficial. They killed most airborne bacteria and provided a natural antibiotic effect that had prevented any serious infections among the team. "Morning report," she whispered to Morrison, who had joined her at the entrance. "Rodriguez is already down in the lower caves working on the hydroponic systems," he replied quietly.
"Tanaka has the morning watch from the observation post."
"Chen," he paused. "Sorry, the other Chen.
Marcus is working on expanding the water collection system. Everyone else is still sleeping." Sarah nodded.
Dr. Marcus Chen, no relation despite the shared name, was their water specialist and had become invaluable as they learned to harvest the planet's natural resources without triggering defensive responses from the ecosystem. "Any word from the orbital station?" she asked.
Morrison's expression darkened. "That's what I wanted to talk to you about. Our last scheduled communication was 3 days ago."
According to the protocol, Captain Walsh should have checked in yesterday. Sarah felt a knot form in her stomach. The plan had been for the UES Indomitable to maintain orbit and provide emergency evacuation if needed. But the planet's electromagnetic storms were getting stronger as they approached the seasonal change Dr. Rodriguez had predicted. "Could be interference from the storms," she said, though she didn't believe it.
"Could be," Morrison agreed.
"Or the council might have decided we were taking too long and ordered them to leave."
They both knew what that would mean. Without orbital support, the mission changed from a 1-year challenge to a permanent colonization effort.
Sarah wasn't sure if that thought terrified her or excited her. Dr. Rodriguez emerged from the cave system's lower levels, her clothing damp with the planet's perpetual humidity but her face bright with discovery. "You need to see what I found," she said, barely containing her excitement. They followed her down through the winding tunnels they had carved and expanded over the past weeks. The deeper caves maintained a constant temperature and humidity that was almost comfortable, and the walls glowed with a soft phosphorescence from symbiotic organisms they had learned to cultivate.
"Here," Rodriguez said, leading them to a chamber they hadn't explored before.
"I was following the water flow patterns when I broke through into this space." Sarah stepped into the chamber and gasped. The room was clearly artificial, carved from the living rock with tools and techniques unlike anything in the previous expedition reports. The walls were covered in intricate patterns that seemed to shift and flow in the phosphorescent light. And, in the center of the chamber sat a collection of objects that were unmistakably tools, weapons, and art.
Intelligent life, Morrison breathed. Current intelligent life. Rodriguez nodded enthusiastically. And, look at this.
She led them to a section of wall where the patterns were different, more recent, the carving marks still sharp.
These symbols. I think they're records. And, some of them show bipedal figures.
Sarah studied the carvings more closely. The artistic style was alien but somehow familiar, showing scenes of figures working together, building, hunting, and what looked like ceremonies or celebrations. But, in some of the more recent carvings, the bipedal figures looked startlingly human.
They'd been watching us, she realized. 4 weeks, Rodriguez confirmed. Maybe since we arrived. And, Sarah. I think they're trying to communicate.
As if summoned by her words, a sound echoed through the chamber, a low, musical tone that seemed to come from the walls themselves. It was answered by another tone from a different direction, and then another, until the chamber filled with a complex harmony that made the carved patterns seem to dance. Morrison had his spear ready, but Sarah put a hand on his arm. "Wait," she said. "If they wanted to hurt us, they've had plenty of chances.
This feels like an invitation," Rodriguez finished.
The musical tones faded, leaving behind a silence that felt expectant. Sarah made a decision that would have horrified the council's military advisors but felt right in her gut. She stepped forward and, using her hands, began tapping out a simple rhythm against the carved wall. The response was immediate. The tones returned, this time clearly mimicking her rhythm before expanding it into something more complex.
Sarah tried to match the new pattern, laughing when she made mistakes.
The unseen musicians seemed to find her errors amusing too. The tones took on what could only be described as a chuckling quality.
"First contact," Morrison said wonderingly.
"We just made first contact through interpretive percussion." The musical conversation continued for several minutes, growing more complex and playful. Finally, the tones faded into silence, and they heard the sound of movement in the tunnels beyond the chamber. But, instead of retreating, Sarah stepped toward the sounds. "Ambassador," Morrison warned, but she shook her head. "This is why we're here," she said. "Not to prove humanity can survive this world, but to prove we can belong to it."
The first creature that emerged from the tunnel was unlike anything in the galactic databases.
It stood roughly human height but moved with a fluid grace that spoke of perfect adaptation to the heavy gravity. Its skin was a shifting pattern of colors that seemed to respond to emotion or environment, and its large, multifaceted eyes held an intelligence that was unmistakable. Behind the first came others, dozens of them, moving with the careful, respectful posture Sarah had learned to associate with peaceful intent on this world. They carried no weapons she could see, but their hands ended in claws that could clearly be deadly if needed. The lead creature approached slowly, stopping just out of arm's reach. It tilted its head in a gesture that was startlingly familiar, then began to speak in a series of tones and harmonics that were clearly language.
When it finished, it waited. Sarah realized it was her turn to try.
She didn't speak the language, of course, but she could attempt to match the emotional content. She hummed a simple melody, trying to convey greeting, curiosity, and peaceful intent. The creature's skin patterns shifted to brighter colors, and it made a sound that Sarah was certain was laughter. It spoke again, this time incorporating some of her melody into its words. Dr. Rodriguez was frantically taking notes with her mechanical instruments. "The language structure is incredibly complex," she whispered.
"But it's not just auditory. Look at the skin patterns, they're part of the communication too."
The lead creature seemed to understand that Rodriguez was trying to learn. It began speaking more slowly, repeating phrases while its skin showed clear emotional states. Soon, Rodriguez was humming responses and even attempting some of the color changes by holding different minerals from her pack near her skin. Morrison remained alert but relaxed his grip on his spear. "What do you think they want?" he asked quietly. As if understanding the question, the lead creature gestured toward the carved walls, then toward the humans, then toward the tunnels leading deeper into the plateau. The meaning seemed clear. "They want to show us something," Sarah said. The journey through the tunnel system revealed the true extent of the indigenous civilization. The natives, who called themselves something that sounded like Kethmori in human approximation, had built an entire city within and beneath the plateau. The architecture was organic, grown rather than built, with living walls that provided light, heat, and even food. As they walked through the living corridors, the Kethmori who joined their group began pointing out features and speaking in their melodic language.
Even without translation, the tour was enlightening.
They showed rooms where younglings learned by playing games that incorporated lessons about the planet's ecosystems. They demonstrated workshops where tools were grown rather than manufactured, shaped through symbiotic relationships with modified organisms. But the most impressive revelation came when they reached the central chamber of the city. The walls were covered with records that clearly showed the history of the previous off-world expeditions. The Kethmori had watched every attempt to colonize their world, had observed the patterns of failure, and had developed detailed records of what worked and what didn't.
They'd been studying us, Rodriguez realized. All of us. Every species that's tried to settle here.
The lead Kethmori, who had introduced himself with a name that sounded like Veltar, began showing them specific carvings. The Valerian expedition, with their heavy technology and force field barriers.
The Thrax biodomes that tried to terraform local areas.
The draconian fortress that attempted to impose military control over the ecosystem. Each record showed the same pattern: initial success, followed by increasingly aggressive responses from the planet's life forms, followed by destruction.
But the human records were different. The carvings showed the humans learning, adapting, working with the environment rather than against it.
Veltar gestured to a section of wall that was still being carved, showing human figures working alongside Kethmori figures in perfect cooperation. Then, he pointed to Sarah and spoke in a long, melodic passage that needed no translation.
"He's offering us something," Morrison said. "Some kind of alliance."
Dr. Rodriguez had been studying the agricultural displays with growing excitement.
"It's more than that," she said. "Look at these growing techniques.
They've developed a form of symbiotic agriculture that could feed millions without damaging the ecosystem. And their bioengineering, they can literally grow buildings that are stronger than our best materials." Sarah felt the weight of decisions settling on her shoulders. This wasn't what the Council had expected when they sent humanity to Kepler 438b. They had expected failure, or at best a desperate struggle for survival. They hadn't expected humanity to discover an intelligent species that had been hiding from galactic contact for millennia.
"What are you thinking?" Morrison asked, recognizing her expression. "I'm thinking the Council played a game they didn't understand," Sarah said.
"They thought they were sending us here to fail or to conquer.
But what if they accidentally sent us here to learn?"
Veltar seemed to sense the importance of the moment. He led them to another chamber, this one filled with what could only be described as a communication center. Organic structures that might have been computers grew from the walls, pulsing with bioluminescent displays that showed complex data streams. Through a combination of gestures, drawings, and the growing vocabulary Rodriguez was developing, Veltar explained that the Kethmori had been observing galactic civilization for thousands of years. They knew about the Council, about the various species and their politics, about the endless cycle of expansion and conflict that characterized interstellar relations. They had chosen to remain hidden because every contact they had observed between galactic species and planetary natives had ended in subjugation or destruction. But humanity's approach was different. Instead of trying to conquer or terraform, the humans had tried to adapt and belong.
"He's asking us to choose," Sarah realized as Veltar's explanation continued.
"We can complete our mission for the Council, prove we can survive here for a year and claim our rewards. Or we can choose to stay and learn from the Kethmori, become part of their world instead of trying to claim it."
The implications were staggering.
If humanity chose to stay and develop a relationship with the Kethmori, they would gain access to technologies and knowledge that could revolutionize civilization.
Bioengineering that could solve hunger and housing.
Ecological techniques that could restore damaged worlds. A completely different approach to expansion that was based on cooperation rather than domination. But it would also mean giving up their place in the council, abandoning the political and economic advantages they had been offered, and effectively removing humanity from the galactic political stage.
Morrison was thinking along the same lines.
It's not just about us, he said. This decision affects all of humanity.
Do we have the right to make it?
Rodriguez was practically vibrating with excitement.
The scientific applications alone, we could transform human civilization. End scarcity, restore Earth's ecosystem, develop new worlds without destroying them.
Sarah looked around the chamber, with its living walls and organic technology, at the Kethmori who watched them with patient intelligence, at the records that showed thousands of years of careful observation and wisdom.
There's a third option, she said finally. What if we don't have to choose between the Council and the Kethmori? What if we can bridge the gap?
Veltar tilted his head in the questioning gesture they had learned to recognize. Sarah began drawing on a clear section of wall, using the mineral markers Rodriguez had developed for communication. She drew the council chamber, the various species, the politics and conflicts. Then, she drew the Kethmori city, the harmony with nature, the sustainable technology. Finally, she drew lines connecting them, with human figures serving as bridges between the two ways of life. Veltar studied the drawing for a long time, conferring with other Kethmori in rapid, musical exchanges. Finally, he turned back to Sarah and began a new drawing of his own. It showed the galaxy, with various worlds marked by different symbols. Some worlds burned with conflict. Others grew green with sustainable life. And, spreading between them, like a web of connection, were pathways marked with symbols that combined human and Kethmori elements. The message was clear: this wasn't just about one world or one species. This was about changing how intelligent life spread across the galaxy. Sarah felt her heart race as she realized the magnitude of what was being offered. This was bigger than the Council's challenge, bigger than humanity's political ambitions. This was about fundamentally changing the relationship between technology and nature, between expansion and sustainability, between conquest and cooperation. But, first, they had to survive the next 6 months and prove that humans could not only adapt to Kepler 438b, but could become partners worthy of the Kethmori's trust. As if reading her thoughts, Veltar gestured toward the chamber's display systems and began showing her something that made her blood run cold. The orbital tracking data showed that the UES Indomitable was indeed gone, not destroyed, but recalled. The Council had decided that 6 weeks was long enough to wait for humanity's inevitable failure. They were stranded on Kepler 438b with no way to communicate their discoveries to Earth. The Council believed they were dead, and their success or failure would be judged purely on whether any humans survived until the next scheduled contact in 11 months. Sarah looked at her small team, at the alien allies who offered partnership beyond anything humanity had imagined, and at the choice that would define not just their fate but the future of human civilization. The real challenge was just beginning.
The Council chamber was in chaos when the quantum transmission arrived 11 months later.
Ambassador Zethkar stood before the holographic display, his forearms trembling with rage and disbelief as he read the report that had just arrived from the automated monitoring station at Kepler 438b. "This is impossible," he snarled, his segmented eyes glowing with fury.
"The humans cannot have survived.
No species has lasted more than a month on that Deathworld." The crystalline quartz representative sang a complex harmony that translated roughly to smug satisfaction.
"Perhaps you underestimated them, Ambassador Zethkar.
The monitoring data is quite clear."
Indeed, the data streaming from the orbital sensors was undeniable. Not only had the human settlement survived, it had thrived.
The thermal scan showed a thriving community of over 300 individuals, with sophisticated structures that seemed to be grown rather than built. The electromagnetic signatures indicated technology, but not the kind that previous expeditions had used. "Send a verification team immediately," ordered Counselor Mordak of the High Command, his draconian features twisted with suspicion.
"This data must be corrupted. Perhaps the humans have found some way to fake their survival."
3 days later, a Valerian scout ship dropped out of hyperspace near Kepler 438b, carrying a full diplomatic and scientific team. What they found when they entered orbit defied everything they thought they knew about the Deathworld below.
The planet looked different from space.
The violent storm systems were still there, but they seemed more organized, less chaotic.
Bioluminescent patterns that hadn't been recorded before spread across the nightside like vast neural networks.
And, strangest of all, there were artificial structures visible from orbit, not the crude shelters they had expected, but sophisticated settlements that seemed to blend seamlessly with the natural environment. Commander Valthak of the scout ship studied the sensor readings with growing alarm. These structures, they're using biotechnology we don't recognize.
And, the population density, there are thousands of life signs down there. His science officer, a nervous young Valerian named Kaithvor, was running detailed scans.
Sir, I'm detecting multiple species working in coordination. The human biosignatures are clear, but there are also indigenous life forms that show signs of advanced intelligence.
Indigenous intelligence?
Commander Valthak's mandibles clicked with agitation. There were no intelligent species recorded in the initial surveys. Perhaps they were hiding, Kaithvor suggested quietly.
Before Commander Valthak could respond, their communications array activated.
A transmission was coming from the planet's surface, clear, strong, and in perfect galactic standard.
Valerian vessel, this is Ambassador Sarah Chen of the Kepler 438b Colonial Alliance. Welcome to our world. Please accept our coordinates for a safe landing zone.
Commander Valthak stared at the communication panel in shock. The transmission was coming through channels that shouldn't have been possible. There were no technological installations on the planet capable of such sophisticated communication. Ambassador Chen, he replied carefully, I am Commander Valthak of the Galactic Council Verification Team.
We are here to confirm your mission status. We understand, Commander. We've been expecting you. Please follow the navigation beacon we're transmitting.
Our landing facility can accommodate your vessel.
Landing facility? Commander Valthak's confusion deepened as his navigation officer confirmed that they were indeed receiving guidance signals from the surface.
The beacon was directing them toward what the sensors showed as a large, flat area surrounded by organic structures that seemed to shift and flow like living tissue. As their ship descended through the atmosphere, Commander Valthak got his first close look at what the humans had built. It wasn't built at all, it was grown. Massive trees with hollowed-out interiors served as living buildings. Vines and root systems had been shaped into roads and walkways. Bioluminescent organisms provided lighting that was both beautiful and functional. And everywhere, working side by side, were humans and creatures that looked nothing like any species in the galactic database.
The landing pad itself was a marvel of biological engineering.
What appeared to be a living platform expanded and adjusted itself to accommodate their ship, providing perfect stability and even connecting to their airlock with a flexible tunnel that grew from the platform as they watched.
By the ancient stars, whispered Kaithvor. How is this possible? Commander Valthak was wondering the same thing as he prepared to disembark.
The briefing materials had prepared him for either corpses or desperate survivors clinging to life in crude shelters.
They hadn't prepared him for this.
The airlock cycled, and Commander Valthak stepped onto the surface of Kepler 438b for the first time. The air was breathable for Valerians, though thick and humid. The gravity was as crushing as reported, but somehow the organic platform seemed to provide subtle support that made movement easier. Waiting to greet them was a group that looked like it had stepped out of a fantasy rather than a survival mission. Ambassador Sarah Chen stood at the center, but she looked nothing like the diplomatic photos in his files. Her hair was longer and shot through with strange, luminescent highlights.
Her skin had a healthy glow that spoke of perfect adaptation to the environment.
Her clothes were clearly made from local materials but were more sophisticated than anything he had expected. Beside her stood humans who had clearly thrived in this environment, their bodies showing the muscular adaptation to heavy gravity but also an ease of movement that suggested perfect comfort with their surroundings. And, mixed among them were the indigenous creatures, the Kethmori, he would learn later, whose colorful skin patterns and melodic communication created an atmosphere of welcome and celebration. Commander Valthak, Sarah said, stepping forward with a smile that was genuinely warm.
Thank you for making the journey. We have much to show you.
Ambassador Chen, he replied, struggling to maintain diplomatic composure in the face of his shock. The Council sent me to verify your survival and assess your claim to have established a permanent presence on Kepler 438b. Oh, we've done much more than that, Sarah said, her smile widening.
We've established something entirely new.
Come, let us show you what humans and Kethmori can accomplish together. The tour that followed shattered every assumption Commander Velthak had held about planetary colonization.
The Human-Kethmori alliance hadn't just survived on the Deathworld, they had created a paradise. The biotechnology they had developed solved problems that had plagued galactic civilization for millennia.
In the agricultural sectors, they saw food production systems that could feed thousands while actually improving the soil and supporting local ecosystems. The Kethmori had taught humans to work with symbiotic organisms that converted atmospheric gases into nutrients, created perfect growing conditions, and even defended crops from harmful organisms. The industrial areas showed manufacturing techniques that grew products from programmed biological templates.
Need a tool?
Plant the right seeds and wait a week for them to grow into exactly the implement you required.
Need building materials?
Cultivate organisms that secreted substances stronger than any metal, naturally resistant to corrosion and perfectly biodegradable when no longer needed.
The research facilities were perhaps the most impressive.
Human scientific curiosity combined with Kethmori biological wisdom had produced breakthroughs that made the Council's most advanced technology look primitive.
Medical treatments that used symbiotic organisms to repair damage at the cellular level.
Environmental restoration techniques that could rehabilitate dead worlds in decades rather than centuries. Energy systems that tapped into the planet's own bioelectric networks to provide unlimited, clean power. But what impressed Commander Velthak most was the social structure they had created. Humans and Kethmori worked together not as separate species cooperating, but as partners who had found ways to combine their different strengths. Human innovation and adaptability merged with Kethmori patience and ecological wisdom. The result was a civilization that was both highly advanced and perfectly sustainable. How many humans are there now? He asked as they toured a section where human children played games with young Kethmori, learning from each other in ways that transcended language barriers.
Over 2,000, Sarah replied.
We've had multiple waves of volunteers who came down from Earth once word got back about what we were building here. The Council may have considered us dead, but Earth never stopped monitoring our signals.
Commander Velthak stopped walking. Earth has been in communication with you this entire time?
Of course, Sarah said, looking surprised by his question.
Did you think we would abandon our people?
The orbital relay station we established allows real-time communication with Earth. We've been sharing everything we've learned with human scientists, and they've been sending us volunteers who want to be part of this new way of life.
Orbital relay station? Commander Velthak looked up at the sky with alarm.
We detected no artificial installations in orbit.
Sarah followed his gaze and laughed. Because it's not artificial. Come, let us show you one of our proudest achievements.
The journey to see the orbital installation required a trip in what the humans called a living ship, a creature that had been bred specifically for space travel, capable of surviving in vacuum while providing a comfortable environment for passengers. Commander Velthak found himself in the disturbing position of flying inside an organism that was clearly alive and intelligent, yet seemed perfectly content to serve as transportation. The relay station turned out to be a massive organism that lived in space, feeding on solar radiation and electromagnetic energy while serving as a communication hub. It was beautiful in its alien grace, with crystalline structures that captured and focused signals across interstellar distances. Human and Kethmori biotechnicians worked together within specialized chambers in the creature's body, maintaining and improving its capabilities.
This is how we've been coordinating with Earth, Sarah explained as they toured the living station. And how we've been preparing for this moment. What moment? Commander Velthak asked, though he was beginning to suspect the answer.
The moment when the Council would come to verify our success and we could show them a better way to spread life across the galaxy.
The return journey to the planet's surface gave Commander Velthak time to think about what he had seen. The implications were staggering.
Humanity hadn't just survived the challenge the Council had set for them, they had discovered something that could revolutionize galactic civilization. The biotechnology alone could solve resource scarcity, environmental destruction, and the endless conflicts over habitable worlds. But, more than that, they had proven that cooperation between species could produce results that neither could achieve alone. The Human-Kethmori Alliance represented a completely different model for how intelligent species could interact, not through domination or exploitation, but through genuine partnership. When they landed back on the surface, Commander Velthak found himself facing a choice that would define his own future. As the ranking council representative on site, he had the authority to make preliminary determinations about humanity's claim. He could recommend that the council honor their agreement and grant humanity full membership rights. Or he could find some technicality to deny their success. But there was a third option, one that Sarah Chen presented to him as they sat in a living chamber that provided perfect comfort while connecting them to the planet's vast biological network. The Council operates on principles that were developed for a galaxy where resources are scarce and habitable worlds are rare, she said. But those principles don't apply when you can turn any world into a garden, when you can grow everything you need, when cooperation produces abundance instead of scarcity. Commander Velthak studied the documents she had presented, detailed plans for sharing Kethmori biotechnology with other species, for establishing similar alliance colonies on worlds throughout the galaxy, for fundamentally changing how civilizations expanded and developed. "You're talking about revolution," he said quietly. "We're talking about evolution," Sarah corrected. The next step in how intelligent species relate to each other and to the worlds they inhabit. Through the transparent walls of the chamber, Commander Velthak could see the community that had grown around him. Human and Kethmori children learning together. Scientists from both species making discoveries that neither could have achieved alone. Artists creating beauty that transcended the limitations of single species imagination. "What do you need from me?" he asked finally. "Help us prove to the Council that this works," Sarah said. "Stay here long enough to see how the partnership operates. Learn about the technologies we've developed. Then, return to the Council not just with verification of our survival, but with an invitation to join us in transforming the galaxy." Commander Velthak made his decision. Instead of filing a simple verification report, he requested an extended research mission. His ship remained in orbit while he and his team spent 3 months learning about human-Kethmori cooperation. They studied the biotechnology, experienced the sustainable civilization firsthand, and began to understand the implications of what had been discovered. When Commander Velthak finally returned to the Council chamber, he carried with him not just confirmation of humanity's success, but samples of living technology, recorded demonstrations of bioengineering capabilities, and detailed proposals for extending the partnership to other species and worlds. The presentation caused an uproar that lasted for days. Some council members, led by Ambassador Zethkar, denounced the Human-Kethmori Alliance as a threat to established galactic order. Others, fascinated by the technological possibilities, demanded immediate access to the new innovations. But it was Councillor Mordak of the High Command who asked the crucial question, "Commander Velthak, in your professional opinion, do these humans and their allies represent a threat to Council authority?" Commander Velthak considered the question carefully. "Councillor, they represent something far more dangerous than a threat to our authority. They represent proof that our authority is no longer necessary." The debate that followed would reshape galactic civilization. Some species chose to maintain their traditional approaches to expansion and development. Others sent delegations to Kepler 438b to learn about the new partnership model. A few, including Commander Velthak's own people, established their own alliance colonies based on cooperation with indigenous species and sustainable biotechnology. Humanity had not just survived the Council's challenge, they had transformed it into an opportunity to change the fundamental nature of galactic civilization. The Deathworld that was supposed to prove their unworthiness instead became the birthplace of a new way of living among the stars. Years later, as Ambassador Sarachan looked out over the thriving multi-species community that Kepler 438b had become, she often reflected on how wrong the Council's assumptions had been. They had thought they were testing humanity's ability to conquer a hostile world. Instead, they had discovered humanity's greatest strength, the ability to find partners in the most unlikely places and to build something beautiful together.
The galaxy would never be the same.
And that, Sarah knew, was exactly as it should be.